Welcome to the Mind Money Spectrum podcast, where your hosts, Aaron Agti and Trishul Patel, go beyond traditional finance questions to help you explore how to use your money to achieve the freedom you want in life.
Hi, my name is Aaron Agti. I'm a financial advisor in the Bay Area, and I'm here with Trishul Patel, a wealth manager on the East Coast.
Hey, Aaron, great to be here today. And thanks, everybody, for listening and watching.
Great to be here as well. So if you've listened to a few episodes, a couple of themes that have come up in the past are things like fees, especially on investments and costs. And we like to distinguish fees that the investments cost, so the expense ratios of investments, versus the advisory fees that our clients pay us directly. And a distinction there is kind of the value you get for the fees that you pay. Another big theme is how housing, education, and healthcare prices have been increasing greater than inflation for a generation or so. And we want to look at kind of more of a true economic idea of rent seeking and how it applies to kind of these two themes of when do costs go up and there's actually value related to those costs, and when can costs go up that are extracting in some nature. And so as a former hedge fund manager and a much better economist than I am, Trishul is going to give us an introduction to rent seeking as an economic term, and then how it applies to some of the things we do in everyday life. So, Trishul, do you want to start us from a economics, like high school economics? Can you quickly explain rent seeking?
That's about the level I'm going to come at this with. I was kind of laughing because you said I'm a much better economist. And I might have.
Yep, you're better than me. It's a low bar to clear.
I might have 1 or 2 more weeks of high school economics under my belt. That might be the edge that tips the scales here. But I think it's an important concept to understand. So I think it's definitely worthwhile to dig into it. So I remember when I first learned about rent seeking, it was laid out in an example. So I'll probably just give the same example here. That it's pretty illustrative. So imagine there's like a public road, and it connects two cities. It's the only road out there. City A and City B, they use this road to go back and forth, and it costs like $10 million to build. And then all of a sudden, this private investor comes in and says, hey, I see you got this nice road here. What if I buy a small segment of this road and I'll maintain that small segment, and I pay you, the city, 11 million bucks for just this half-mile stretch over this 200-mile piece of road. And the city might think, oh, wow, this is amazing. We're getting all our money back and we're only giving up a small piece of this road. This must be a win-win-win. What could go wrong? Right?
Yeah.
So, let's say the city did go into this transaction. Now they paid for their entire road, and all they had to do is give up a small little piece of it. Well, now this new owner can come in and say, okay, this is great. I'm going to maintain this small piece, and I'm going to charge every vehicle that goes over this small piece of road $100. Okay. Right? So basically what this new investor did, air quotes, right, is they put their money to work. They bought up a very small piece of land. You can imagine a quarter-mile stretch costing $11 million would be pretty expensive, right? But now they get to charge every single person on this road who wants to navigate it, who wants to go back and forth 200 miles, right, from A to B. They get to charge, frankly, whatever price they want such that they soak up all the value that people would get from being able to make this journey.
Mm-hmm.
And essentially, the reason this is rent seeking is this new investor hasn't really done anything to make the road better, right? Maybe they cleaned it a little bit more, but they really haven't added value to the situation. So this is a concept known as rent seeking.
Okay, so I actually like that example because we can probably apply it to things, but I want to try to clarify some things. This road, it could cost the two cities, this is what they cost, $5 million each, to provide a public good. And because the investor comes in and pays for it, there is this overall good that the people use, but instead of coming out via taxes, because it no longer requires taxpayer money to pay for it, it is now kind of privately funded. Would that be a fair assessment of this example?
Kind of. So it's a little subversive because the city or the two cities only gave up a very small portion of the road in theory, right? And
so the two cities are still responsible for maintaining all the rest of the road.
Yeah, but they still own all the rest of the road as well.
Yeah. Okay. So it would, I don't know how to say better, but if this was to try to be fair, then the cities might want to have to sell the entire road and probably also have some kind of regulation that the owner is responsible for maintaining it well enough to kind of up to a certain standard. So it's probably some kind of inspection that has to happen occasionally, like that. If that was the case, then theoretically the owner is providing this good that does not require taxpayer dollars. Would that be getting close to fair?
Well, now we also have a monopoly situation where.
Okay, that's true. Okay, yeah.
So
we need two investors to have two roads right next to each other, go into the same place.
There you go.
But now it's like, okay, yeah. Like, why do you have two? That's just a waste of resources. Why do you have two roads go to the same place?
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is maybe a whole different discussion, but this is part of why some things are publicly owned instead of privatized, right? When you privatize something that's highly susceptible to market forces and that requires, a lot of public resources, then it turns into a tricky situation.
Okay.
Sticking to the core though, basically, rent seeking is when somebody or some institution tries to make money without creating any new value. Right? That's how you boil it down very simply.
Okay.
And usually this comes across because there's some sort of manipulation of the situation, right?
Okay.
Maybe trying to put in some unfair amount of influence in how things have come across, to somebody's own personal advantage. This brings up notions of moral hazard, right? Doing something that.
I don't know his name. The pharma bro who bought the patent to a drug and then increased the price of that drug from $15 to $1,000.
There you go. Yeah.
Okay.
Like another maybe anecdotal, maybe common, maybe true example is a city has a public park, but a private company buys up the parking spaces. Right, so you got the public park that's maintained by the public resources and taxes, but the actual parking lot has been purchased by a private organization, and that private organization can now charge all the extra value that people get from visiting that park and keep all of it for profit, even though they're doing very little to maintain the actual resource at hand, the public park.
Okay. So Do you want to try and now give us an example of how does this apply to investment fees and or healthcare, education, and housing?
Right. So what was the title of our last episode? Did you have that handy?
Believe it was Financial Planner tells the story of why fee only matters.
Okay.
The one before that was you can't pay someone for free money.
Okay, I'm talking about that one.
I think that was where you're going, but yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Okay, so you can't pay somebody for free money. And what we kind of touched upon in that conversation is the notion of, if I have a money-making machine and I'm willing to sell you that, how much am I going to charge for that? Well, I'm probably going to charge you the amount of value that money-making machine can bring, right? Mm-hmm. Plus like an extra $1 for being the middleman. Yeah. But I'm not going to sell you that money-making machine at a discount. Why would I? Yeah. Because people would pay the amount that a money-making machine makes. And the way this kind of ties into fees is, if I'm offering you a service that's going to do better from an investment standpoint, well, the amount that I'm going to charge is pretty close to the amount that it's going to do better by. Yeah. Just put some numbers behind it. Let's say I'm a hedge fund manager and you can right now go out and you can get a market return of 7%. And I say, well, I'm going to get 10%. Well, I'm going to charge you 3%, right? That's probably what's going to happen when you do all of the math. Now it's going to be obfuscated, but the economics of the situation are going to push everything towards that direction.
Yeah. Maybe if they're being, not altruistic, but like there's probably some market forces of, well, I'm not going to pay 3% just to get the same thing, but I'll pay 2.5% to get an extra 0.5%.
The crazy part is you probably end up paying over 3%. So.
Yeah. Well, no, I think the crazy part is they charge 3%, but they only get 9.5%. And so then you end up, your gross says 9.5%, but your net says 6.5% when you could have gotten 7%.
Yeah. That's roughly what I mean. Like once you add everything up and you add in all of the taxes and blah, 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 you're very likely, I'd say, to be worse off than where you started.
Yeah. So I don't want this conversation to be too jaded. Can you think of a good example where this kind of middle layer adds value?
Well, okay, so yes, when you're doing something as a service to make somebody's life easier, right? Or when you're trying to reduce complexity, when you're trying to make somebody, when you're trying to do a transaction that they can't do on their own, right? Something like that. It's fine to have a middleman to basically to help you make a transaction go through in a safe and orderly manner, right? That's typically the role of a broker, right? To find a counterparty and to make the transaction go fairly, to ensure that fraud risk has been lowered. So that there's plenty of reasons why that might make sense. Now, from the standpoint of investments and paying for performance, I think there's less reasons why that's sensible. But, in the space of public investments, I think, I've hammered down many examples, or we've talked about this at length, of why I personally believe in just passively investing and getting the most out of that and keeping the fees low. But, there may be small examples of why you may want to pay for some sort of market exposure that you can't get otherwise.
So the first thing that came to mind for me were life insurance agents or other insurance agents and realtors, where I can see with life insurance and other types of insurance, like the complexity of different life insurance products, they can help you discern down to here's what you need and why. And there's a transactional component. We'll get into, I'm trying to remove the sales incentives, but I think that there's a value of having someone who is a subject matter expert to be able to provide you with a complex transaction. On the realtor side, I think that over the last decade-ish, I have seen value in like staging homes for sale. And I think realtors come in and think, well, if you can do this much in work before you sell it, you usually can get an ROI on those dollars. So if you were selling a home for $1 million, like say, okay, if you do $30,000 worth of work, we might be able to sell that for $1,050,000 up to $1.1 million. Like there is an ROI level of making the house more presentable in a attractive buyer's or seller's market. So those are two areas where I think where yes, there is value to the fees that experts charge. Is it 6% or 5% or 4%? Like that, I don't know how to judge. And then maybe like the values at like 3 to 4, and the 2 on top is like the rent seeking, maybe, but something like that would.
Well, okay, so I guess I have a comment about both of those before I capitulate entirely. So on the insurance side, I think it's important to have a distinction between investing and buying protection.
That's right.
And, in theory, an insurance product can accomplish both, but I don't think that's the best way to go about it. I think, I think they both should be segregated for a valid reason, which I'll talk to in a second. But essentially, you can get a life insurance product that's designed to protect you and also to provide some sort of investment type of exposure, right? That has some sort of cash value that can grow with the market and such and such. And, frankly, I don't think that's a great idea. I think when you try to do too much inside of one wrapper, I think you get something that's a little bit less or worse than the sum of the parts. Meaning, I think if you're going for protection, I think you should just get a non-cash value type of insurance product that's specifically designed to provide you with the protection you're seeking. Yeah. And I think any extra cash should just be invested in sort of a passive strategy outside of the insurance wrapper, just within your standard portfolio. And I think if you end up going down that route, then the insurance type of products you're left with are far less complex. They have a lot less bells and whistles. You still need to, yep.
I guess my first thought was, do I need $1 million of life insurance or $2 million of life insurance? Yeah. Where I'm looking for like the coverage amounts kind of thing, and how does the extra premium fit in cash flow? And again, I'm trying to give the insurance agent the benefit of the doubt that they're a good person who wants to help their clients / customers, because I acknowledge that there are those who get paid a lot more in commissions from selling the permanent life insurance policies, and so incentives can change that. But and that's a bad agent problem. It doesn't remove, like, we still need a good insurance agent to help us, because I think this is just complex enough that going on your line to buy it yourself, while that's okay for some, I think that there's also the possibility for more mistakes. And I think probably the biggest one is just underinsurance. It's like, oh, I got $1 million. I'm paying $300 a year. I'm good. It's like, well, your income based on your case rate, you should have more than that. But there's no one there to tell them that kind of thing.
Well, Aaron, we're here.
I know, yes. And so that's why that's trying to, again, remove the difference between like a comprehensive financial planner for just the insurance product. Because I still use LLIS, and I want the people at LLIS who are going to be broker dealers, like they'll do a banner application, Transamerica, Lincoln, and they'll help find the insurance company that will provide what we're looking for but understanding some of the waivers or some of the riders on there, like this gets complex enough that I would not recommend my cousin go do it by themselves. Like, yeah, you probably want to talk to someone.
Yeah, I do think so. I think a few things. I think, okay, so there's one just high level distinction that I think is sensible when going into the insurance market, for life in particular. And again, I think it's going for a product that doesn't have a cash value. It's not permanent. I think term will fit most situations.
Mm-hmm.
And in those cases, yeah, you still have a bunch of decisions to make, right? And you could go in with the help of an advisor, even having those conversations. But yeah, if you do end up going to an agent, I think just the only other thing is probably go for independent agent that's not captive to a single insurance company,
I agree with. Yeah.
right? One that has Rolodex of insurance companies that they can reach out to, and then they can price shop on your behalf, so that you're not specifically tied to insurance company X, right? At least then you have a better shot, even if you are just going without an advisor.
Yeah, again, there's value in that insurance broker helping it kind of shop around.
Yeah, I agree.
But I expect that person to get paid.
Yeah. Right. So, but again, now we've titrated that role down to a broker, right? Helping you in the transaction to officiate the decision making, right?
Yes.
And to reduce risk of fraud and reduce risk of underinsurance, right? Just make sure the transaction goes as well as possible based upon your best interests.
Yeah.
Real estate is also an interesting cookie. Aaron, have you heard about the recent antitrust stuff that's come through?
For real estate? No.
Yeah. So there's this whole notion about.
Is this the rent, the software that different
MLS?
Landlords use to artificially increase rent prices?
Well, okay, so yeah, it has to do with the multiple listing service, which I think anybody who's probably shopped around for real estate has seen those listings, and they popped up on Realtor.com and Trulia and all that. Mm-hmm. It's part of a database, right, of listings, and the interesting part about being able to list on that database and being able to broker deals on that database is you have to be licensed appropriately. And essentially what ended up coming down from that is there were a bunch of antitrust issues that came up because of that.
Okay.
Yeah, and the distinction here is, and we'll put more details in the show notes because I'm just going to keep things very high level. But there's a difference between a real estate agent and a licensed realtor, right?
Okay.
And the bar to be a real estate agent is pretty low, but if you want to be a realtor, you have to join I'm going to say cartel, but you got to join the club, right?
Again, cartel is another economic term, because I was also seeing like barriers to entry. Cartel, the economic term, not the other commonly used term.
Right. Let me define cartel from an economic standpoint before the mafia gets upset at me.
This is one where like the value of the services are artificially increased due to restriction. It sounds like it's the licensing is like a government restriction. It's kind of like
I think it's non-government in this case.
Yeah, so it'd be a self-regulatory organization, but it would be a little like using a CPA or an enrolled agent in filing your taxes. You can do it yourself, but if you hire someone, they have to be a CPA or an enrolled agent to be able to file taxes on your behalf. And so there are certification requirements and education requirements that they have to test into.
Yeah, so I'm asking the GPT, is this a FSRO? Okay, here we go. Okay, let's clear up and dispel and put some notes out there. Okay, so cartel, right? Very quickly from the GPD. I can share this, right? Yeah, I can. We're on the YouTube. All right, one
Okay.
second here. Just for our viewers, again, we're on YouTube, so if you want to actually see the stuff that we're talking to, you can watch the video. But Aaron, is that big enough?
Yeah.
Okay, so in economics, a cartel is a group of independent businesses or organizations that collude to control the supply, pricing, or production of a product, right? Maybe the big one that we know about besides, the drug kingpins is OPEC, right?
Okay.
With controlling oil prices,
cartel.
that is,
Yeah.
I guess it's a government-sanctioned cartel where a bunch of leaders meet and they decide how much they want to control the supply and price of oil around the globe.
I was thinking of like professional sports leagues and owners there where there's enough money there, but they also don't let others in.
Yeah.
Thing without charging a lot of money.
There you go. Yeah. And, this probably ties into the rent seeking as well, from an economic standpoint. But okay. So we got the notion of a cartel, but how does that fit into real estate and realtors in general? Okay, so to become a licensed realtor in the US, you got to meet all these requirements. There's some basic requirements, but the key one is typically you have to team up with a brokerage that's licensed. Some states require this. So again, they're trying to make it harder to get this designation. And then the key here is you have to join the National Association of Realtors. So then, and only then, you can have the word realtor, on your business card. You have to do continuing education and stuff like that. So, on surface, it looks pretty similar to the requirements that Aaron, you and I need to do to be a certified financial planner, right?
Yep.
But this is actually not a self-regulatory organization. It's an industry regulation, or an industry group that set this up. And I'm going to get some specifics on how does this impact the ability to leverage the MLS, because this was key to the antitrust stuff that came up. Okay, so the MLS, which is the key database if you want to try to do real estate transactions in the US, is restricted to licensed realtors. So you have to join this association to be able to be part of the club that can leverage the system. And that puts a lot of control into the hands of an organization that's private. Now, what is the MLS and why is it so important? Well, if you're a real estate agent and you want to leverage the ability to post listings where other people can see them, and you want to be able to show clients listings and make a profit, right? Or get your commission, well, you need to go through this service essentially because it's a monopoly on listings in the country. And what that means is it's kind of ripe for this type of situation of having a small organization could have a lot of power. And what essentially ended up coming up in this space is the notion that, well, how is there a sense of competition if it's really just controlled by this one organization? Meaning you have to follow what they say. And this organization can say a lot of things. For example, there's this notion of why 6% commission. Aaron, you just mentioned that earlier in this conversation. And it's interesting to note because one way to think about that 6% is it was probably calculated to give real estate agents and realtors sensible income, right? If they did this as a career. So when you think about this, going back in the 1980s, well, a 6% income or commission split two ways, 3% on a transaction would mean you would have to do maybe one deal month, right? So 12 deals a year on the average home price to get a sensible income. So let's just do some quick math. Average home price 1980.
Yeah.
I shouldn't say median. Sorry.
I guess 100K.
50K, right?
50K. So okay.
Okay, so now what's a 3% commission?
1,500. So having an annual income of 18 grand. So what's the median income in 1980?
Okay. So
median income 1980.
Okay, so there you go.
So one average deal per month, you're just under the median household income.
Yeah, so if you do like 1 to 2 deals a month, you can do that, right? Now, here's the notion that 5 to 6% commission has stayed steady over the last 40 years, but the median home price has accelerated above the rate of incomes that have gone up on a median basis. So let's look at the same numbers for today. So median home price 2024. 416,000.
Okay.
Median. Let's just do that math. 3%.
So that'd be a median. That'd be an income of 150.
Okay.
So let's do
150K income, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, what is the average? What's the median?
Median household income. 2024. It's gonna be what, 70-ish, 75.
You're right, 75K. Okay, so what this means is if you're, just for the people listening, essentially the median household value has jumped from 45K to 416K over the last generation, about 40 to 50 years.
Yep.
And what that means is with that same 6% commission rate, you only need to sell about half the amount of homes that you needed to sell a generation ago to make that same amount of salary.
Yeah.
So why didn't the commissions go down, right? To compensate for that fact, meaning you have to do half the amount of work or you get paid twice the amount, inflation adjusted, for doing the same type of transaction. Now, maybe it's twice as hard to sell a home these days because I don't know, right? A generation ago, we didn't have internet, we didn't have pictures, we didn't have videos.
This actually goes back to the license thing. Like, I wonder if there are more realtors available. So like, so if there are more realtors that are selling a similar number of houses, which is not necessarily a safe assumption, because I don't know how that's been one of the issues, is that housing growth has not kept up with population growth, and that's a factor in why homes are more expensive.
Yeah, well, let's touch on that. But before we get to that, my personal argument is it should be easier to sell a house these days than it was 50 years or 45 years ago. Meaning we have so much technology to help these transactions, right? We have the ability for any human to see any house they want in a 3D environment with hundreds of pictures without needing to travel to that location, right? And all of this can be done on pennies to the dollar.
So this is where technology comes in. Again, the economic term, technology.
Right. So you would think technology should have stepped in and reduced the commissions over the last generation, reduce the transaction costs to make this transaction happen. Yeah, it's gone in the opposite direction.
So this is really interesting because I think it's a question of, we have seen investment expense ratios come down with ETFs. Those have come down. The value of advisors and the relationship has not. It's been still pretty steady.
Mm-hmm.
The travel agents, the number of travel agents has come down dramatically with the existence of things like Expedia and Orbitz. But those travel agents that still exist actually charge more because they're offering a niche service of high-end travel experiences, kind of like theater versus movies.
Right.
And so I think it's one of the questions, like, does I think it's like the realtors are claiming they provide the relationship service that advisors do. Like, oh, I'm going to learn your lifestyle well enough to present the few homes you might like. But you're arguing that the transaction of real estate is much more like an S&P 500 ETF, where it is a little more commoditized and technology to help those costs come down.
Yeah. So I'm going to switch back to the video.
Okay.
So
kind of like, is a realtor a value added service, or is it a commoditized transaction?
Right. So imagine there's two scenarios, right? There's a scenario where an individual just wants to buy a house, right?
Yeah.
And they're willing to go to a listing service, check out all the houses, even drive to those houses that they like, and self-select whichever ones, the few they want to see. Essentially, all they need from there is somebody to officiate the transaction in a cost-effective way that's free of fraud.
Yeah.
Now then there's option B, where somebody wants the full service, right?
Yeah.
They want everything under the sun, meaning they just want to sit back and let all the information come to them and be digested and whatnot. In both those cases today, you pay the same 6%.
Okay, that's a good good clarification. And I think that's back to the monopoly. Like, there's no option available for someone to go to an MLS listing and buy a house, kind of doing their own research for the house that they want, to look at everything. They have to go through a realtor charging these levels of commission.
Well, here's the irony. The MLS is available from many different sources for free online, because Realtor.com taps into it, Trulia taps into it. You can even do it, but you still got to pay the 6%.
You can access the database, but you can't actually do the transaction.
Right. When you go to connect with the agent on the listing, that agent is part of the cartel, right?
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So I don't think that's been why housing has gone up, but we don't.
No. This has to just do with
that's
rent
really
seeking.
Good, yes, that's It's the cost of realtors has doubled over the last generation.
Yeah.
Where the value is at best the same, but realistically a lot lower.
Yeah. And it's an example of rent seeking, where you may have an industry that's tried to make money without creating value.
Yeah. Okay.
And by influencing or manipulating the situation, right? The fact that there is this, it's essentially
realtor agrees to charge 6%, and you need to hire a realtor to
access the MLS.
Yeah. Okay.
This wasn't even, I wasn't planning on using this example, but
this actually worked out pretty well,
I guess. Here we are. The actual examples that I had penned down at the beginning of this conversation are somewhat related, but 3 big areas that we talked about where for whatever reason, well, for the reasons I guess we'll be discussing, where prices have seemed to gone up above the rate of inflation over the past generation, for reasons I believe seem to tie back to other versions of rent seeking. And these three are, just education prices in general, healthcare prices in general, and the one we already just mentioned, real estate. So all these areas of cost for the average household have increased higher than the rate of inflation. But have they done so because individuals are getting that much more value out of it to compensate for these increased prices? Or is it just because, or is it largely driven by this notion of rent seeking?
So one, I think from the healthcare side, I do wonder how much is just healthcare administrators or hospital administrators. They're non-medical, non-service, business-oriented, and then just the number of those types of administrators has grown. I'd be curious where like healthcare technology comes into play, because I do think that healthcare outcomes on a smaller individual basis are better. So like my knee surgery, I tore my ACL. I had knee surgery for a torn meniscus. The arthroscopic surgery only needed 2 holes, whereas 20 years ago it took 3 holes. Like it's and there have been so many other advancements in technology like that, and I'm sure there's like an R&D cost. I don't know like how. I don't know how to incorporate the idea of significant advancements in medical technology, but the costs to me are definitely higher. And I do think that when I think of like costs, it's the conversation we had earlier about how just health insurance is just the worst system ever. And it takes people on average 2 working days per year just dealing with health insurance. And so I'm curious how you think of improvements in technology and the research and costs that go into that versus like, would we expect if so I think the question is, if hospital administrators were the same number and more or less the same percentage of healthcare costs 40 years ago, but the technology itself is a lot better, the actual genuine value add from medical technology and medical research, would you expect healthcare costs to still be going up?
Right. So I think, just kind of stepping back a bit, what we've had this conversation before in general, and at a high level, what we noticed is healthcare spending has roughly doubled, over the last generation after adjusting for inflation.
Okay.
And, similarly for education and similarly for healthcare.
Yeah.
So, you might total that with understanding of you would be spending, maybe 30 to 40% of your household spending on those 3 areas a generation ago. And now you're spending like 60 to 70% on just those 3 areas today.
Okay.
And, the question is, are you getting double the amount of value, or is it just rent seeking that has compensated for these increases? Because all these other areas, the prices have shrunk, right? And things are a lot cheaper because things are a lot more inefficient or more efficient.
Yeah, so I think this is like cost of computers have more or less kind of come down. TVs have definitely come down.
Yeah.
Cost of computers have kind of come down, but the strength of the computer has gotten better. But like car prices have kind of increased with inflation, where from a technology point, they should be getting cheaper, but the cars themselves are actually getting better. The technology is getting better. And so if we remove the rent seeking from the hospital administrators, then we would expect healthcare costs to kind of increase like car costs, because the technology is actually getting better, but that's kind of a keeping up with inflation kind of thing. Like the
Yeah.
technology advancements allow car prices to increase with inflation beyond what just the what we'd expect if cars weren't getting better. We'd expect cars to get cheaper.
Right. Yeah. And so, in the healthcare space, I think it's been a combination of multiple things. Yes, administrative costs, for whatever reason, have been going up, even with the introduction of all of this technology that should be streamlining and making things far more efficient. It's something we mentioned in that episode where we took a deeper dive into this. It's just a data point that stuck in my head. It was this hospital that had 100 beds, good sized hospital. And then for each bed, they had 10 people working in administration to figure out the billing for a single bed, meaning you have 1,000 administrators for a 100-bed hospital to figure out how all the people get paid, right?
Yeah.
And imagine adding that much overhead to a system where all you're trying to figure out is the price of an Advil or price of a procedure, and make it all efficient. And I think some of the other data points that we mentioned is pound for pound, our healthcare spending compared to other developed nations is about 2 to 1, meaning we spend $2 for every $1 that other developed countries spend, and then there's very little upside to show for it. So in my mind, it's rent seeking that's absorbing that differential. It's inefficiencies. It's the fact that we have a system where you have insurance companies that need to follow a whole different set of rules in every single state that they operate in, building up this moat of cartels that makes it very difficult to make transactions sensible. And if you're doing a procedure here and you happen to be traveling, then you have a whole different other set of rules to think about. It's a bureaucratic nightmare.
Yeah. Okay. So, I think in the last one, so we kind of touched on real estate, kind of touched on healthcare. So now I'm thinking, how guesses on rent seeking education.
Yeah. So, the media, we just ran these numbers a minute ago, but when it comes to rent and housing, roughly you're spending far more of your paycheck today than you needed to do a generation ago or your household income a generation ago to cover your housing expense. Roughly what we noticed is, I have the numbers right in front of me. I'll read them off, but essentially about $20,000 was the median. Where is it? Median household income.
21,000 was median income in 1980. Now it's 75.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in 1980, about 2.5 times your median annual income, you had a house, right? That you could live in. A median 2.5 times and you got your home for about 50,000. And today, your median household income of 75,000, well, 2.5 times 75,000 is, come on, GPD, read my mind.
Like 187, 188.
Yeah, 188, and the house price is double that. So you need like over 5 times your annual salary, household income to afford a house. So it's just that much harder to get the same thing. And then the question is, okay, so maybe a few things have changed, like your average square footage, it has increased, right?
Yeah.
And houses may be a little bit more efficient, but a good part of it is just the cost of the land itself, right, has increased because the population has grown and it's been harder, or the supply of housing hasn't kept up. Yeah. And that differential has led to a sharp rise in housing because people got to live somewhere. It's inelastic, right?
Okay.
It's a good, right? Yep.
So can you try to explain the difference between the just supply and demand part of the curve, where if demand increases but supply doesn't, we expect prices to go up. What is the difference between, like, where does rent seeking come in there?
Right. So when you have a good that I threw in a term in elasticity or inelastic, the inelasticness of housing. And what that means is how sensitive is the price to a small change in demand. And for some things, it's very sensitive if you really need that thing. Like, for example, if you're on a deserted island with two people and you have, 10 bottles of water and you control those 10 bottles of water, well, you can charge whatever you want, right? Because it's such a scarce resource. Meaning, if somebody needs just a little bit more water and you control it all, you can name your price. Right? The price can jump to whatever you want it to be. And this occurs with many goods that are very important. They're very their prices are very sensitive. They're very elastic in that situation. But there's some things where it's not that important, right? You can increase the demand and the price won't go up that much, right? And those are known as inelastic. So in this situation, you have a housing market where you have increasing population and the supply of houses hasn't kept up. And there's various reasons for that, which we can touch on. But essentially, if you have just slightly more demand than houses, then the housing prices can explode because everybody has to live somewhere. And at that point, that explosion is because of this notion of rent seeking, meaning the people who are gaining that extra value aren't doing it because they're making the houses better. They're just gaining that extra value because of that differential in supply and demand because they got there first.
Okay, so that's interesting. So in this case, the rent seeking is people who have benefited from increases in housing costs because they already owned a house, even though they haven't added any value to homes across. So it's like in this case, like there's a lot of like small rent seekers that add up to really big overall impact.
Basically, it's a differential between the overall supply and demand that we're seeing.
This actually sounds like this is like a NIMBY issue. They're not in my backyard.
Sure.
People voting against increasing housing where they live are benefiting from the rent seeking of their own property increasing in value.
Yeah, like for example, a large part of wealth in America is tied to home prices, right? Many households tie their wealth to the fact that they own a home and they have a large amount of equity in that home, and they're self-interested in keeping that high. So why would they vote for more development in their town if it's gonna tumble their nest egg?
Okay. Do you think education is also hurt by increase in housing? Is it just like dorms cost more, or because I know there's been things like if the education is close enough, they tend to compete on amenities and have nothing to do with the college education they're getting instead of being competitive on price. So it's like they build more gyms and rec centers and increase the cost of the education.
Right.
But is there something else that you can think of as kind of a good rent-seeking example in there?
Yeah, so it also ties similarly into the real estate notion because of access to funding. So, for example, our government encouraged the investment into real estate by subsidizing and influencing the ability for Americans or individuals to get loans, right?
So mortgage interest deduction on your taxes is the U.S. government subsidizing owning a home.
Yeah, and various other related programs, right?
Yeah.
And what that led to is the opportunity for rent seeking to increase, right? Because now individuals who would not have access to buy a larger home immediately had more money to buy a larger home or spend more on a home than they could, which meant that everybody ends up spending more on a home that they could than they could otherwise, which essentially means that they're all paying more for the same thing, and the benefit of that paying more went to the people who already owned the home before they, the new people got in.
Yeah.
So yeah, essentially it was a distribution of wealth from, the government taking this money in taxes, or essentially creating debt and distributing it into the equity prices of Americans across the country.
Okay.
Not necessarily creating value. So I would argue that something similar happened in the education space with the access to student loans across the country.
Okay, I see what you're saying. Okay,
Right.
so student loan access has increased the demand by potential college students greater than the number of quality education institutions increased. So you have an artificially increased demand, similar or the same supply allows for that price to go up without any additional value.
Yeah. So imagine this. Imagine a university education costs $10,000, and the average individual has $10,000, in their saved up to spend on education.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, the government hands everybody an extra $10,000 to spend on education. What does the university say? Oh, I think it's 20,000 now. I think that's the new price. Let's charge 20.
Yeah. So it's not necessarily, it is an issue, but it's not from an economics perspective, not quite the same of like predatory lending of getting 18-year-olds to sign for loans where they may or may not graduate, or the quality institution cannot provide a job at the level to pay off those loans. That's an issue, but not exactly with the rent-seeking issue. For us, it's just the general access to student loans, and the government subsidy of student loans has allowed universities to increase prices without increasing value.
Yeah, and I didn't prepare this link. Maybe I can find it, but essentially it was a conversation with a university professor, and they were, or not professor, president. They were going down, the list of things on why education has increased so much. And, frankly, at the end of the conversation, it boiled down to one thing. The main reason the prices have gone up is because they can.
They can charge more, and they still get plenty of applicants.
And people are going to sign up, therefore they're going to go up. And why are people going to sign up? Because they have more money to do so.
So that, I don't want to take too long, but is there a way to counter this?
Well, so in the education space, it's also frustrating, like healthcare, and what we talked about with the realtors. There's all of this technology that should be making the ability to educate our population far cheaper, right?
So, because it feels like a little like a prisoner's dilemma of like each individual is probably making a decision that aligns with their individual incentives. And so like each individual is kind of making a rational decision, but it's hurting society as a whole.
Yeah, it's definitely a prisoner's dilemma situation where we're not incentivized to make the optimal choice. We're incentivized to stick to the status quo of paying more for less when it comes to these areas, which is why, something outside of the box needs to change, right? It's structurally built in terms of why we've ended up this way. We've encouraged, legislatively, politically, however you want to say it, we've encouraged a system that's suboptimal. With education, again, there's so much technology out there. There's so much knowledge out there that can flow freely that didn't exist a generation ago. Why does it cost 10 times more then?
Okay. I almost want to wrap up there because I want to spend some time just thinking about that. Like, because does it take something revolutionary? Does it take something huge, drastic, and upending the system? Is there we got here incrementally, we can come like fight it incrementally? Like I can't even think of a potential path.
I have something that I wanted to touch on a little bit.
Okay.
I'm optimistic on the education side. I think the secular changes and advancement of technology are going to push things forward, and eventually it has to capitulate. The fact that there's just all this knowledge out there. You can have a personal AI tutor teach you whatever you need to do, fill in any gaps for pennies on the dollar. There's no reason why you have to spend half a life savings for a degree.
My guess is companies would, and I think they already are, showing that they will be willing to accept some kind of other education alternative than a bachelor's degree. I think that was a um, a quick, easy filtering function of someone who can follow instructions, put in the effort, and show hard work. Of like, I need you to do these complex things over years. It takes a lot of effort to get there, and so that worked for hiring companies. I think that'll be something else along those lines of accepting certification programs that, like, you've passed all the classes at Stanford and MIT because they're available for free online. You have this certificate. It's not a bachelor's degree, but the employer will say, I acknowledge you've done the work, and we'll take that as an acceptable, again, like filtering or indication of, yes, you are a good hard worker who can do this work.
Right. Yeah. And I think similar secular changes are happening in the healthcare space with, more personalized medicine, telemedicine, just taking out the middleman.
I have enjoyed being able to send messages to my doctor and my medical team. Even if it was a nurse answering, like, I don't need to make an appointment 1 month from now to ask a quick question about a medicine that I'm taking. So that has helped a lot.
Yeah. And, just frankly, I heard in third world countries that have less access to medical resources, they have been leading on the generative AI for situations like that. Imagine the nearest doctor is 100 miles away, but you have instant access to a GPT. So
I think the question there is like, do I need to go see the doctor?
Yeah.
Or can I wait a little bit?
There you go. Here's the resources of medicine I have in my cabinet or in our local village. Do we, what can we do, or do we need outside help? Whereas before, hit or miss. Like, what are you gonna do, right?
Yeah.
So I am optimistic there. The third area, which I'll just touch upon for a minute, I'm actually less optimistic on, but for good reasons. Frankly, I think the housing issue is this, again, differential between supply and demand.
Okay.
And that can change once population starts going in the other direction. So.
Oh, I see. Okay. So you think that as kind of like, what is it? Median births per woman kind of go down below, I think it's like 2.1 in the US right now. So get below 2. The way a population can grow at that point is through immigration. But if we have a flat population, okay, that's interesting. I know that.
Well, so here's how that kind of ties in. Yeah. So essentially, to have a replacement rate that keeps the population stable, you need about 2.1 births per childbearing female, right, to compensate for a little bit of slippage, assuming no immigration, right, coming in or out, right?
Yeah.
And we know that average birth rate, the average birth has been amount of births has been dropping, right? It's been plateauing and going lower.
And that's pretty consistent across most developed countries, that a variety of factors lead to that.
It is, yeah. So imagine you have a situation today where you have the demand outpacing supply, and you have that elasticity concern, right? Highly elasticness of prices. Well, it's a double-edged sword, right? When that flips, well, then you have prices coming down very quickly because you have an oversupply. And once you have a supply hit a certain threshold, what's to keep the prices up? And
Yeah.
the reason I say this is because we already have examples at play in other developed countries. I don't know, Aaron, we may have talked about this, where birth rates in Japan have been falling off, right?
Yeah. That's the classic example of like a worst case for the US of deflationary environment for a generation. And like there's no growth. Like when it comes to like safe withdrawal rate research, Japan is like the worst case scenario, that you need a ridiculous low withdrawal rate on the scale, like 2% or lower, to have the same time frame as you do in the US.
Yeah, and the secular concern there is their birth rate has been dropping precipitously.
Yeah.
South Korea similarly. I think South Korea is the lowest right now at 0.7. And I'll put a link to this, but if you run the math forward for just 2 generations, a 0.7 birth rate means your population drops by over 80% in 2 generations.
Yeah. So that's again where you need immigration to support that. But if you, as a society, are kind of too restrictive on immigration, then you're going to come up with lots of problems.
Yeah. And so Japan has passed that differential at this point. And I was actually keyed into some of the real estate prices over there. And basically the real estate has dropped through the floor, meaning you just have tons of empty lots, you have tons of supply and not enough demand. And it's going to get worse every single year, meaning you can literally buy a 4-bedroom house for like 10,000-20,000 USD.
Yeah.
So that same house in the US, right? Why is it worth so much? Right? Does it have to be worth that much a generation from now? And I put this as a cautionary note, meaning, does it really make sense to have a large percentage of your net worth in real estate if this is a demographic shift that we're heading towards? Now, I want to counter that with the other side of rent seeking, because I didn't want to leave this conversation off with just rent seeking being bad, but rent seeking is essentially buying an investment for the pure purpose of making money without creating value, right?
Okay.
But there's other ways to put money to work, meaning putting money to work for the purpose of creating value. And that's where I think money should be allocated towards when it's an investment purpose. And, frankly, that's what companies and stocks are designed to do. They're designed to put money to work to create more value. So I would say when it comes to investments, look for investments that shy away from rent seeking and look for investments that try to put money to work to make more money by creating value.
Okay. That is helpful. Thank you. This is longer than a regular economics lecture.
Yeah. Hopefully we didn't put more than half our audience to sleep this time.
It's like we're trying to condense a semester of high school economics into an hour and didn't quite make it.
But still, I think a helpful notion to understand, especially when you're thinking about why is this thing going up. Yeah.
So, well, thank you very much for that, Trishul. I really appreciate it. I love our conversations, and we'll do this again.
Right. Thanks, Aaron. I enjoyed this conversation as well. And if you're enjoying listening to these, do subscribe, like, and share. That's how we get known out there. So we would appreciate it. And thanks. Bye.
Bye. We appreciate you joining us today for this episode of the Mind Money Spectrum podcast. Be sure to visit mindmoneyspectrum.com to access the entire library of episodes. Remember, it's not black and white, but the wide spectrum of gray area where you get to pursue the freedoms you want in life. Opinions voiced in this material are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. All performance referenced is historical and is no guarantee of future results. All indices are unmanaged and may not be invested in directly. Have a nice day.